Family and friends are worried when a young father goes missing right before Christmas.
He could have been anywhere.
This is not like him.
That's not like him not to text.
Christmas had come and gone, and nobody had heard from him.
The search feels endless.
They posted on social media and organized a search. Me and my sister and everybody was looking for him.
She believes that there's foul play involved.
Or had he disappeared by choice?
In the past, he's bounced from house to house.
She might have even thought he left town.
Until their worst fears are confirmed.
I could see his foot sticking out, and I knew.
His body was by the creek for 2 weeks.
As the investigation unfolds, secrets surface.
There's domestic violence and infidelity.
I should have just stayed away from him, man.
It really just leads down a rabbit hole of trying to find the truth about what happened.
But the truth always comes to light.
The witness was terrified, violent.
She says she knows what happened.
She dropped a bomb on us in the rental car.
December 22nd, 2021. It's 3 days before Christmas in Columbia, South Carolina, the Palmetto State's capital.
Columbia is unique in that it's the second largest city in South Carolina, but it also has a really hometown feel.
People choose to live here because it's really family-oriented.
During the holidays, with people coming in town to visit family, it's just a very busy and exciting time.
But while most of the city is focused on the holidays ahead, 29-year-old Taylor Wardlaw is calling Columbia police to report her boyfriend, Terrell Sims, missing.
Terrell Sims.
She had not talked to Terrell in 2 days.
Taylor said she hadn't seen Terrell since early Monday morning. He had gotten home late, but then turned right around and left again.
He said that he had to go to a friend's house to go get his phone charger.
She says that at first, she wasn't too worried.
He plays by his own rules, but this is not like him.
For the most part, he would be back home within a day or so.
But this time is different.
He is not answering his phone. He's not responding to messages.
Close to Christmas.
It's not like him to just ignore her calls or go without seeing his kids.
He was a really dedicated father. He was excited about his children.
She's convinced that something is wrong.
"26-year-old Terrell Sims could always bring a smile to those around him.
Terrell was fun. He liked to make people laugh. He always knew how to make you feel good.
He was considered the class clown.
His personality was infectious. He was someone that was always seen with a smile on his face.
But his life wasn't always easy.
He has a twin sister, and when they were infants, their mother passed away.
And then when they were 4, their father died.
As a result, Terrell and his sister were raised by their aunt, along with their other siblings.
She took all 4 of us in because she wanted to keep us together.
As a teenager, he fell in love and became a father.
They had a son when they were in high school.
He loved being a father.
While he loved his little boy, the relationship with the boy's mother didn't last.
It just wasn't meant to be.
So Terrell devoted more of his time to his first love, music.
Music was something that he loved to do.
He spent a lot of time listening to music, learning, and he seemed to be way ahead of his years with regards to his knowledge of music.
He used to rap, and I used to try to rap with him, and he said, "No, sis, that's not for you."
He dreamed of something bigger, something more. He believed rapping was his way out of his current circumstances.
Eventually, Terrell found his own place and continued to work hard on his dreams.
He moved into the colonies, a really large apartment complex here in the Columbia area, filled with young people who were trying to get their start.
He supported himself with fast food jobs and making sure that he can support his passion, which is his music.
While at the Colony Apartments, the aspiring rapper had no trouble attracting the ladies.
The women be like throwing themselves at him, calling him handsome.
That personality, coupled with his talent for music, really, really set him up to be a ladies' man.
And over the years, Terrell had 2 more children, both daughters.
He took very good care of his kids. Take them to the park, watch movies with them. He always made sure he got them gifts to give them money and things like that.
One of the reasons that Terrell was so excited about fatherhood is because he himself had been robbed of parents.
It made him want to be a better father.
But as great as his relationship was with his kids, he never remained in a committed relationship.
He had no interest in settling down with any one woman.
He loves all women. That's just was my brother's personality.
But that all changed when he met Taylor Wardlaw in 2018.
Terrell meets Taylor at the Colony apartment complex, and they instantly connect.
She was from the Bronx, so she had a different swagger to her. It excited him.
She's a single mom. She's all about family.
It wasn't long before they became an item.
She was happy and she was always laughing.
Taylor really turned things around for him. He felt like he had found the person that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with.
And before long, in 2020, they got the great news that they were going to welcome a new child together.
They were both bursting with excitement.
He was over the moon. He was looking forward to the fact that he was going to have another boy.
When their son arrived, the young family worked harder than ever to make ends meet.
They were committed to making their family work. She would work during the day, and then he would provide his support as dad and work at night.
And by 2021, they had saved up enough money to move into a modest rental home and out of the colonies.
They were headed in the right direction. Everything was looking up.
But now, just 3 days before Christmas, Terrell has gone missing.
I really think something is wrong.
We had our officer meet with her directly to take that missing persons report.
And when he gets there, Taylor says there may be a way to find him.
According to Taylor, he had just recently got out of jail.
And he is still wearing his court-ordered ankle monitor.
At the end of 2021, Terrell Sims and Taylor Wardlaw appeared well on their way to building a family and a future together.
He had 3 kids, she had 1 child, and together they made their family work.
They also shared a 1-year-old son together, and they had recently moved into a new house.
But now, after reporting Terrell missing, Taylor is meeting with an officer from the Columbia Police Department.
Taylor let him know that Terrell came home Monday and mentioned that he left his phone charger at his friend Jordan's house.
He left, and I haven't seen him since.
She says Terrell isn't answering his phone, and she doesn't know where he is.
That's not like him not to text or call.
Or is it just Taylor that he's giving the silent treatment?
She's afraid that he might have left her for someone else.
Taylor explains that while she loves Terrell, they had a very challenging relationship.
It was nothing major, just couple stuff.
But in the summer of 2020, things escalated.
Shortly before the birth of their son, Terrell was arrested on domestic violence charges.
He spent almost a year in jail, and he missed the birth of his son.
And the whole thing was just a big misunderstanding.
She kept saying he didn't do it. She tried to drop the charges, but the state wouldn't let her.
He was in jail for a year.
Taylor says she stayed in contact with Terrell while he was in jail and was happy to have him home after his release in August of 2021.
She's actually the one that went and bailed him out.
But when he came home, he was still wearing his court-ordered ankle monitor.
The purpose of that monitor is to really set up a zone where they are allowed to be and not allowed to be during their release time. The exclusion zone would have included Taylor's house.
He had to stay 1,000 feet away from her at all times. If not, his ankle monitor would alert the police and that he could face being rearrested.
But they had figured out a way around the exclusion zone.
She stated that they never had any issues because her and the kids moved into the rental property while he was in jail.
Taylor never told the court that she moved and had a new address. So once Terrell got out of jail, he moved back with Taylor.
He was with her the entire time, in complete violation of his parole and probation agreement upon his release.
According to Taylor, Terrell was just happy to be home with his family and get to know his new son.
She said things were really good between them.
But early Monday morning, she and Terrell had gotten into an argument.
Where have you been?
Chill out, man. I was just at Jordan's making beats.
No, you weren't.
She got on his case asking about who he's been with and where he's been.
She was very upset that he had been out for so long. But what really bothered her was that he left almost immediately after returning home.
Terrell stormed off, and when she asked him where he was going, he said he had left his charger at his friend's house and he was going to get it.
But now Terrell isn't answering her phone calls.
The reality is most people have more than one charger. So going back out in the early morning hours to get a charger just didn't make sense.
She thought he was lying, and she's afraid that he might have left her for someone else.
She says she's worried because he hasn't checked in on the kids.
But he's never done anything like this before.
After talking to Taylor, they put out a bolo on Terrell.
With the bolo out, the case is turned over to the detective who tries to find out more about Terrell.
They pulled Terrell's police records, but they're mostly minor things.
He was kind of out in the streets when he was younger, and now that he's gotten older, he seemed like he was trying to kind of get it together.
But the arrest that landed him in jail is more serious.
The charge was stating that while Taylor was 9 months pregnant, Terrell had actually put a gun to her belly.
He threatened her and their unborn child.
Now, Terrell had denied doing this. It was a he says, she says situation. However, he was still arrested for this.
And unfortunately, with domestic violence, men are at a disadvantage when police are called. They're often seen as the aggressor. And when the cops showed up, despite both of them having conflicting reports, the police automatically believed her.
However, that's not all the detective finds inside Terrell's file.
According to police records, a few hours after Terrell went missing, his ankle monitor was removed.
The detective investigating the disappearance of Terrell Sims has learned that he's no longer wearing the ankle monitor that tracks his movements.
He'd been ordered to wear the monitor as a condition of his bail for charges of domestic violence against Taylor.
Police are looking for whether or not people are tampering with these devices.
When the ankle monitor is tampered with, it sends out alerts letting them know that something is not right.
And early on December 20th, an alert on Terrell's ankle monitor came in.
Terrell Sims' ankle monitor had been cut off. Typically when somebody's absconding from supervision, that's because they don't want us to know where they are anymore.
According to the system, Terrell was about 10 minutes northwest of Columbia when the monitor went out.
It appeared to be on Monticello Road, which is a highway leading out of town.
Soon after, the monitor lost signal.
So investigators head out to Monticello Road.
We started the investigation where the ankle monitor was cut off.
It was in a very rural area, lots of streams, rocks.
They search the area, but there is no sign of Terrell.
But they do eventually find the monitor.
Hey, I got something.
We got.
With the ankle monitor a dead end, the detective turns to Terrell's friend, Jordan.
He was the friend that Terrell was with, supposedly the night that he disappeared.
Terrell had been hanging out with him on Sunday evening, and he went home sometime after midnight.
While there, Taylor had been texting Terrell all night.
Taylor was calling incessantly throughout the night, multiple text messages, and it was clear that she was very angry.
Although Jordan had seen Terrell before, he did not come back to his house.
In fact, he knows nothing about Terrell leaving a phone charger.
So now the detectives are trying to find out, was that just a lie that he told Taylor while walking out the door?
I'm going to get my charger from Jordan's. Relax.
The officer will show you out.
Hoping for more insight, the detective reaches out to Terrell's sisters.
Terrell and his sisters were very close. They really relied on each other throughout their upbringing.
However, they did mention that ever since he got out of jail, something seemed different. He seemed a little troubled.
They said that Taylor portrayed this happy little family on her social media, and they just felt like something was off with them.
He was very distant. He wasn't his normal jovial self.
At Thanksgiving, he just kept drinking and drinking. It didn't seem like him.
What the family says seems to add credence to Taylor's fears that Terrell might have just walked out on her.
But even as the detective is suspecting that's the case, it appears that Taylor may have changed her mind.
Christmas had come and gone, and nobody had heard from him.
Taylor posted on social media about Terrell's disappearance and organized a search.
She seemed exasperated that she couldn't find him and didn't know what happened to him.
Taylor isn't the only one losing patience.
His two sisters hadn't heard from him.
I started wondering why they wasn't pursuing. And when I found out in the state of South Carolina, if your loved one don't have a mental illness, they're gonna give time for your loved one to come back.
But Terrell's sister suspects he isn't coming back.
She believes that there's foul play involved.
My brother's not gonna throw away his freedom, he just got home, and I don't see him cutting no ankle monitor up.
Because even if Terrell wanted to disappear out of Taylor's life, why would he not answer the phone calls of his sisters, his family, or his kids?
And then not only that, Terrell was always the type to let somebody know where he was at.
So where was Terrell? No one could figure out where this man was.
Me and my sister and everybody was looking for Terrell, trying to figure out where his last location was.
A possible answer comes late on the evening of December 28th, when a woman named Letitia walks into the police station.
How can I help you?
She says she knows what happened to Terrell.
And she knows who did it.
She killed him.
A woman named Letitia has come forward to the detective investigating Terrell Sims' disappearance, claiming she knows what happened to the 26-year-old aspiring rapper.
What's more is she claims to know who did it.
She dropped a bomb on us.
She explained that she's been friends with Taylor for a long time.
On the 20th, Letitia said Taylor came over with the man she refers to as Youngster.
I don't know his real name, but I'd seen him with her a few times before.
Taylor said she had something urgent to tell Letitia.
What's going on, girl?
You're not gonna believe what I've been through.
What's going on?
Taylor told her that Terrell had came home the night before and they got into a huge argument.
Where have you been? Chill out.
She thought he was cheating on her.
No, you weren't.
This did align with what Taylor told them.
But after that, the story starts to differ.
According to Letitia, Taylor said during the argument, Terrell hit her. And in response, she pulled out a gun and shot him 4 times.
You're making me pissed off right now. I'm over you. I'm over these kids. I'm over everything.
I just wanted him to stop.
She was not going to be a victim anymore. She was simply protecting herself from further violence.
Is he?
Yes.
She said that once she killed Terrell, she called up Youngster and asked him to come over and help her get rid of the body.
Youngster, I need your help.
According to Letitia, Youngster agreed to come over and help Taylor load Terrell's body into the back of her rental car.
They proceeded to drive him out into the country onto Monticello Road.
That's when Youngster cut the ankle monitor off of Terrell's leg.
And then they kept driving, looking for a place to dump the body.
She told me that they took him to some kind of an overlook or a bridge.
Taylor told Letitia that they tossed the body over.
They were expecting to hear a splash because they thought they were throwing him into a stream.
But according to Letitia, that wasn't what happened.
Splash in the water.
I thought you said...
Don't worry about it. Come on, let's go.
They didn't go down to check, and they just left him there.
She told me that's why they came to
Letitia says that is why they came to her apartment that day.
I didn't hear anything.
She wanted help moving his body because she didn't think she disposed of it properly.
She was blown away. Not only that Taylor had admitted this to her, but now she was at her house asking her to help her.
According to Letitia, she told Taylor no.
I'm sorry, but no.
She just didn't want anything to do with it.
Yes, she said.
And that's not all the information Letitia has for the detective.
According to what Taylor said, when she shot Terrell, one of the bullets missed. It went all the way through the wall of the house and hit the rental car outside.
And it hit the rental car.
It's such a wealth of detail about Terrell's disappearance that the detective is left wondering whether Letitia knows even more than she claims.
They really have no way of knowing whether or not Letitia is involved, if she is calculating this to clear her own name.
Following her interview, the detective starts checking with local car rental agencies.
They eventually found where Taylor had rented an SUV a week before Christmas, and she had recently returned it.
They're told that when it was returned, there was some body damage.
And where's that car now?
The rental company sent it to the body shop, apparently to repair a hole in the hood.
They located the vehicle, and lo and behold, there's a hole that Letitia described from a bullet in the hood of this vehicle.
The detective has the car towed to their lab, where they find more damning evidence.
They sprayed down the SUV's hatchback with luminol.
And what do you know? It glowed.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of Terrell Sims now believe they're investigating a homicide.
I have some information about Terrell.
First, the witness came forward claiming that Terrell's girlfriend, Taylor, confessed to killing him.
And now they've found a bullet hole and blood in the rental car that had been in Taylor's possession on the evening Terrell disappeared.
But is the blood Terrell's?
Samples from the SUV are sent off to the crime lab for testing while they continue building their case.
Detectives attempt to identify Taylor's alleged accomplice, a man their informant only knew as Youngster.
I ended up confirming his identity through his social media being connected with Taylor's.
Youngster turns out to be 30-year-old Eddie Brown.
And as Letitia said, he lives in the Colony Apartments.
But that's not all that Eddie and Taylor's social media reveals.
It appears that Taylor and Eddie are more than friends.
As a reminder, Terrell spent almost a year in jail before Taylor bailed him out on those domestic violence charges.
And Taylor has a whole sexual relationship with Eddie.
Does that mean that Letitia has it right that Taylor killed Terrell and Eddie is actually the accomplice? Or if Eddie was hooking up with Taylor, is it possible that Eddie wanted Terrell out of the picture now that he's out?
Hoping to determine Eddie's role in the crime, the detective requests surveillance footage from the Colony Apartments.
They have an extensive camera system. And scrubbing through the videos, detectives find footage of Taylor's SUV.
They see Taylor driving into the colonies at 4:30 in the morning on the night that Terrell supposedly disappeared.
It catches Taylor exiting the SUV and headed towards Eddie's apartment.
A few minutes later, Taylor and Eddie leave the apartment and get back in the SUV.
She leaves with her boyfriend, Eddie Brown.
Everything about this footage is explosive. And it's not lost on the detectives that when they spoke to Taylor, at no time did she ever mention leaving her house.
And while the videos aren't perfect, the damage on the SUV's hood is clearly visible.
Then, some 4 hours later, the SUV arrives back at the Colony Apartments.
She drops him off like nothing ever happened.
But the detective has a pretty good idea of where they've been.
Terrell's ankle monitor had been dumped near Monticello Road. But they needed to confirm if Eddie and Taylor had been to that location.
Hoping to prove that was where they'd gone, the detective turns to the city's traffic cameras.
We actually saw Taylor driving her vehicle outbound Monticello Road.
The footage places Taylor there a little before 8 a.m.
Then within 20 minutes, she was driving back inbound, and that was after his ankle monitor got cut off.
Everything fits what Letitia told detectives.
Which means Terrell's body can't be far, but it will be difficult to locate.
Monticello Road is an excellent place to dump a body. It's sparsely populated and heavily wooded.
There's all kinds of little creeks and rivers. I mean, he could have been anywhere.
Luckily, the timestamps on the camera narrowed the search radius down.
Based on the speed the SUV was going and the window of time of when it passed and when it came back, detectives figured that Terrell's body is somewhere within a radius of about 10 minutes.
With that as their starting point, the search begins.
We were just checking every creek, every river, little dump spots.
They searched all day but had nothing to show for it.
There was a sense of frustration. There was a lot of trash, but no bodies.
But I wasn't going to call it quits without finding him.
Then, about 7 hours into the search, the detective stops on the bridge that crosses Shaver Creek.
I checked the side that had more water, and there wasn't anything there. And so I walked across to the other side, and when I looked down, I saw what looked like a body laying there in a trash bag. I was like, there is no way.
But a closer look left no doubt.
I could see his sock on his foot sticking out, and I knew that I found him.
One of the detectives searching for Terrell Sims believes she has found his body in a creek north of Columbia, South Carolina.
The location and settings are almost a perfect match for what Terrell's girlfriend Taylor supposedly told her friend Letitia.
I found him.
27, I've got both the victim and the suspect here.
When backup arrives, they're able to tentatively determine that the body is indeed Terrell.
His body was actually preserved pretty well.
It's him.
It was cold at that time of year, and he hadn't actually really been submerged in the water.
While the medical examiner's team removes the body for autopsy, the detective faces the grim task of notifying Terrell's family.
It was very heartbreaking. It was a lot going through my mind that day.
But there is some relief. This is like closure.
And it's the final piece of evidence investigators need to arrest Taylor.
They get the warrants together and they arrest Taylor.
When the detectives sit down with her, she continues to act as if Terrell is just missing.
Oh, man, when y'all find this man, he can't say nothing to me. I should have just stayed away from him, man.
When detectives let Taylor know that they found Terrell's body, she acts surprised.
That's why I'm here, because he's dead?
She wants them to believe that she had nothing to do with it.
But detectives inform her that they already got the whole story from Letitia.
I didn't confess to nobody. Bro, this is wicked. So I'm going to jail for something that I did not do.
No. You're going to jail for something you did do.
That's when she asks for an attorney.
So the conversation with Taylor comes to an abrupt stop.
But when the detectives bring in Eddie, he's more willing to talk.
He quickly decides, hey, I'm not going to go to jail for something I didn't commit.
Okay, look, I had nothing to do with this.
He begins confirming exactly Letitia's original story to the police.
Well, I wasn't even there when it happened.
He said that Terrell had assaulted Taylor, and she shot him in self-defense. And he helped her clean it up and dispose of the body. But he minimized his role.
And so he was charged with accessory after the fact.
The news of Taylor's involvement hits Terrell's family hard.
It was Very emotional. I was trying to keep it together for his kids and my sister.
But can investigators make the murder charges stick?
She described shooting him as being an act of self-defense.
Keep playing with me. You really want me to kill you?
Terrell is already out on bail for a prior domestic violence charge.
Which meant that there was a chance that Taylor could get off scot-free.
But once they conducted the autopsy of Terrell's body, it was clear that that was not the case.
He had been shot 5 or 6 times through his back. So he wasn't attacking her.
Ow.
He was trying to leave, and she couldn't handle that. This wasn't self-defense.
With this new information, it really questions the initial arrest that he had, where she says that he attempted to kill her and the baby, and he denied.
But it's Taylor's phone records that give police their best indication of Taylor's motive.
In the days leading up to Terrell's death, she had been texting him repeatedly, asking why he wasn't coming home, who he was with.
Taylor appeared consumed with jealousy, despite having another boyfriend.
And on the night of the murder, jealousy had boiled over into rage.
You could tell that she didn't feel like she was in control of the situation.
So when he finally did come home, detectives believed that Taylor was waiting, angry and ready.
Where were you?
While we don't know exactly what happened, it's apparent there was some sort of confrontation.
You are nuts. All right, stop.
And Taylor pulled out a gun and shot Terrell.
When she was faced with the possibility of him leaving, she made the decision that he would never leave again.
Even worse, Taylor shot Terrell while their children were in the house.
She just didn't care.
It didn't slow her down from her desire to control Terrell.
But would the jury agree? Prosecutors aren't sure.
Given Terrell's history, there just might be enough reasonable doubt to stand in the way of a conviction.
So in March 2024, they make a deal with Taylor.
She pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter in exchange for a 20-year jail sentence.
I was upset. I mean, I ain't gonna lie. I wanted to fight her, but what would that solve?
I'm glad that it came to an end, but I wish that she was in prison for the rest of her life because she's a really evil person. Not once did she ever apologize or express any remorse.
Eddie's role in disposing of Terrell's body earns him 11 years in prison.
I do not believe justice was served in this case. 20 years and 11 years is not good enough for what they did.
All she had to do is say, well, Terrell, this ain't working. We can't be together no more.
And now 4 kids are gonna be without their dad.
But if there's one thing the family and the authorities agree on, it's that Terrell didn't deserve what happened.
I'm not saying my brother was perfect, but still, how he left this world was wrong.
Here's Terrell, a young father, someone that just truly wanted a different life for himself and for his family, and his life is cut short.
If you see something ain't right in a relationship, or if somebody put their hands on you, don't stay, get out of it. You're worth more than that.
Hospitals are built on a simple promise. They are places where fear meets hope, where pain is answered with care, and where strangers place their lives in the hands of professionals they may never meet again. Every hallway, Every patient room, every intensive care unit is designed around trust. Families believe that doctors and nurses will do everything possible to preserve life. Patients surrender control of their bodies because they believe the people standing beside their beds are there to heal them. It is one of the strongest social contracts that exists. We rarely question it. We almost never imagine that the greatest threat inside a hospital could be someone wearing the same uniform as everyone else. Between 1988 and 2003, that unimaginable possibility became a terrifying reality across hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Over the course of 16 years, patients who appeared stable suddenly went into cardiac arrest without warning. Some were recovering well enough to expect discharge. Others had no indication that death was imminent. Doctors searched for medical explanations. Nurses rushed to perform emergency procedures. Families were left stunned by losses that seemed impossible to understand. At first, these deaths looked like tragic complications of illness. After all, hospitals are places where people die every day. Even the most experienced physicians know that medicine cannot save everyone. But as months became years, and years became more than a decade, a disturbing pattern quietly emerged. Unexplained cardiac arrests, missing medications, intravenous bags that appeared to have been tampered with, mortality rates that seemed unusually high in certain departments. None of these warning signs alone pointed directly to murder. Together, however, they painted a picture that no one was willing, or perhaps able, to fully recognize. Behind many of those unexplained deaths stood a registered nurse named Charles Edmund Cullen. By all outward appearances, Cullen did not resemble the public's image of a serial killer. He was not known for explosive violence or public outbursts. Coworkers generally described him as quiet. He worked long hours, frequently volunteered for night shifts, and appeared dedicated to caring for patients. In the controlled environment of a hospital, where professionalism and routine governed everyday life, Cullen blended in remarkably well. He understood the rhythms of the wards, the responsibilities of nursing staff, and the complex medications used to sustain critically ill patients. More importantly, he understood something else. Inside a hospital, death often arrives unexpectedly. And unexpected death does not always trigger suspicion. That knowledge would allow him to move through one healthcare institution after another while dozens of families search for answers they would never receive. Charles Cullen was born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. Decades later, he would become known by a chilling nickname, the Angel of Death. The title reflected the horrifying contradiction at the center of his crimes. Nurses are expected to comfort the vulnerable, to reduce suffering, and to stand beside patients during their most difficult moments. Cullen instead abused that extraordinary level of trust. Using his medical training, he secretly administered dangerous medications, including digoxin, insulin, lidocaine, and epinephrine. According to investigators, these drugs were often delivered directly into intravenous lines or introduced into 4 bags. Victims who had shown signs of improvement sometimes collapsed only minutes later. Cardiac arrest would follow. Medical teams would rush to save them. Families would be informed that everything possible had been done. Yet what many of those families never realized at the time was that the medical emergency may not have been natural at all. After his arrest on December 15, 2003, Cullen admitted responsibility for approximately 40 murders. Official court proceedings confirmed 29 victims. Even so, investigators and journalists have long believed that those numbers represent only a fraction of the true scale of his crimes. Because many medical records no longer existed, because numerous deaths had originally been classified as natural, and because years had passed before investigators recognized the broader pattern. The exact number of victims may never be established with certainty. Some investigators suspected that more than 100 people had been killed. Other experts have suggested that the total could approach 400. If those estimates are even partially accurate, Charles Cullen may have been responsible for more patient deaths than any other healthcare serial killer in American history. Yet this story is not simply about numbers. Every statistic represents a person who entered a hospital expecting treatment rather than violence. Some patients were elderly. Some were critically ill. Others, however, were recovering and preparing to leave the hospital altogether. Their families believed the worst had already passed. They anticipated homecomings, continued treatment, and more time together. Instead, they received devastating phone calls informing them that an unexpected medical emergency had claimed the life of someone they loved. For many of those families, there was no reason to question what doctors told them. Hospitals are filled with uncertainty, and medicine cannot always explain why one patient survives while another does not. It would take years before anyone realized that these tragedies might share a common thread. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Cullen case was not simply that the killings occurred, but that they continued across multiple healthcare facilities over a period of 16 years. Cullen worked at approximately 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home, including St. Barnabas Medical Center, Warren Hospital, Hunterdon Medical Center, Morristown Memorial Hospital, Liberty Nursing Center, Easton Hospital, St. Luke's Hospital, and finally Somerset Medical Center. Again and again, concerns surfaced. Again and again, unusual deaths raised quiet questions. Again and again, medications went missing or irregularities appeared in patient care. Yet instead of triggering coordinated criminal investigations, these concerns often ended with Cullen resigning or being dismissed. Hospitals rarely provided complete warnings to future employers. Fearing legal disputes, reputational damage, or lacking direct evidence, institutions frequently allowed him to leave without fully documenting the suspicions that surrounded his employment. Each departure became a new beginning. Each new hospital offered fresh opportunities, fresh patients, and a healthcare system that knew little or nothing about the concerns left behind elsewhere. Looking back, investigators would later describe this pattern as one of the greatest institutional failures surrounding the case. No single hospital possessed the entire picture. Each saw only isolated incidents. Each believed the problems were local rather than part of something much larger. Meanwhile, Cullen quietly moved from one employer to another, carrying with him not only years of nursing experience, but also a history that remained largely invisible. It was only when those separate fragments were finally assembled that investigators began to understand the scale of what had happened. But by then, years had passed, and many opportunities to intervene had already been lost. This is also the story of how difficult it can be to identify murder when it hides behind ordinary medical practice. Unlike crimes committed in public spaces, hospital deaths often occur behind closed doors. Patients are already ill. Powerful medications are administered every day. Complications are expected. Families are not present for every treatment. In such an environment, distinguishing between natural decline and deliberate harm can be extraordinarily challenging. Cullen exploited that reality with devastating effectiveness. He relied on professional trust, medical complexity, and institutional hesitation to remain unnoticed for far longer than anyone believed possible. Eventually, however, the pattern became impossible to ignore. At Somerset Medical Center in 2003, doctors noticed unusually high levels of digoxin in patients who had never been prescribed the medication. Stable patients suffered sudden cardiac arrests. Hospital officials contacted law enforcement. Medication records were examined. Investigators gradually focused their attention on one nurse whose presence seemed to coincide with an alarming number of unexplained medical emergencies. An important breakthrough came through one of Cullen's own colleagues, Nurse Amy Luffren. She observed his unusual proximity to patient deaths, recognized behavior that troubled her, and later agreed to cooperate with investigators by recording conversations with him. Those conversations would become a critical step in uncovering the truth. In time, Charles Cullen began admitting responsibility for deaths that had remained unexplained for years. His confession brought answers to some families, but for many others, certainty would never come. Countless hospital deaths from that 16-year period could no longer be fully investigated because evidence had disappeared, records had been destroyed, or too much time had passed. That uncertainty remains one of the most haunting legacies of the case. This is not simply the story of a man who betrayed his profession. It is the story of patients whose trust was violated at the very moment they were most vulnerable. It is the story of families who believed their loved ones had died naturally, only to later question everything they thought they knew. It is also the story of a healthcare system forced to confront uncomfortable questions about communication, accountability, and the consequences of missed warning signs. To understand how such a tragedy could continue for 16 years, we must begin long before the investigations, the confessions, and the courtroom. We must return to the beginning of Charles Edmund Cullen's life, to the experiences that shaped him long before he ever put on a nurse's uniform, and long before anyone would come to know him as the Angel of Death. Charles Edmund Cullen entered the world on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. He was the youngest of 8 children in a large family that had already endured more than its share of hardship, long before his name became associated with one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in American history. His early life was marked by repeated loss, instability, and emotional isolation. While childhood adversity can never explain or excuse violent crime, understanding the environment in which Cullen grew up provides important context for the psychological struggles that followed him throughout much of his life. His story did not begin inside a hospital. It began in a home that experienced profound tragedy almost from the moment he was born. Cullen's father, Edmund Cullen, died from a heart attack only a few months after Charles was born. As a result, Charles never truly knew his father. He grew up without memories of him, relying instead on stories and photographs to understand the man whose absence shaped the family from the very beginning. The responsibility of raising 8 children fell entirely upon his mother, Florence Cullen. Supporting such a large household was never easy, and Florence worked tirelessly to provide for her children despite the enormous emotional and financial pressures she faced. Those who later examined Charles Cullen's background often described his childhood as one overshadowed by grief rather than stability. Unlike many children who grow up surrounded by consistent emotional support, Charles spent his earliest years in circumstances where survival and responsibility frequently took priority over comfort. According to later accounts, he became an exceptionally quiet child. He rarely drew attention to himself, spoke very little, and preferred to remain unnoticed whenever possible. Teachers and classmates reportedly saw him as withdrawn, someone who kept his thoughts to himself rather than participating socially. He struggled to build friendships and often found himself isolated from other children. Cullen later claimed that he had been bullied during his school years. Whether through ridicule, exclusion, or simple loneliness, he described feeling separated from those around him. Isolation became a recurring theme throughout his life. Even as an adult, coworkers frequently described him as reserved and emotionally distant despite appearing polite and cooperative on the surface. Looking back, investigators and journalists would note that this tendency toward isolation appeared long before he entered adulthood. It became one of the few consistent characteristics visible across different stages of his life. His emotional difficulties appeared at an unusually early age. According to Cullen's own later statements, he attempted suicide for the first time when he was approximately 9 or 10 years old by ingesting chemicals taken from a laboratory. Whether every detail of that account can be independently verified, it became part of the broader picture that emerged after his arrest. More significantly, it reflected a pattern that continued for decades. Throughout his life, Cullen was reported to have attempted suicide more than 20 times. Those repeated episodes revealed a persistent struggle with depression and emotional instability that extended from childhood into adulthood. Mental illness, however, does not predetermine violent behavior. and countless individuals endure depression without harming others. In Cullen's case, these psychological struggles formed only one part of a far more complex story. Another devastating turning point arrived during his teenage years. In 1977, when Charles was 17 years old, his mother died in a car accident. For someone who had already grown up without a father, losing the remaining parent represented another overwhelming emotional blow. Florence had been the central figure in his life, raising 8 children after the death of her husband while carrying the weight of the family's survival. Her sudden death removed the last stable parental presence Charles had known. Later reports suggested that this event had an enormous psychological impact on him. Already battling depression, he became increasingly unstable after losing his mother. While grief affects every person differently, the accumulation of trauma during Cullen's formative years became impossible to ignore when examining his later history. By the end of his teenage years, he had experienced repeated bereavement, prolonged isolation, and ongoing mental health struggles. Yet despite these hardships, life continued moving forward. After graduating from high school, Cullen chose a path that offered structure, purpose, and professional training. He enlisted in the United States Navy. For many young adults, military service represents an opportunity to begin again, to leave difficult childhood experiences behind while building discipline and new skills. In Cullen's case, joining the Navy marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one that would unknowingly provide him with the medical knowledge that later became central to his crimes. During his military service, Cullen was assigned to the nuclear submarine USS Woodrow Wilson. Life aboard a submarine demanded precision, discipline, and teamwork. Crew members depended upon one another under conditions that left little room for error. Every role carried significant responsibility, and medical personnel were expected to respond quickly during emergencies. It was within this environment that Cullen received medical training and gained practical experience. Working in healthcare, he became familiar with emergency medicine, patient care, intravenous treatments, and the medications commonly used during critical medical situations. These were valuable professional skills intended to preserve life and protect fellow service members. Years later, investigators would realize that the same knowledge had also equipped him with an understanding of how certain medications affected the human body. His later crimes depended not on brute force or conventional weapons, but on an intimate familiarity with hospital medicine. Yet even during his years in the Navy, Cullen's internal struggles did not disappear. Reports indicate that he experienced repeated psychological crises and continued attempting suicide. While serving in the military, rather than finding lasting emotional stability, he remained caught in cycles of depression that followed him from adolescence into adulthood. These recurring mental health episodes became another constant throughout his early life. They suggested a man battling profound personal turmoil beneath an outward appearance of discipline and professionalism. Eventually, in 1984, Charles Cullen left the Navy. His military career had provided him with extensive medical training, but it had not resolved the emotional difficulties that had accompanied him for years. After returning to civilian life, he pursued nursing as a profession, enrolling at the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing. At first glance, the decision seemed logical. His military medical experience provided a natural foundation for civilian healthcare work. Nursing offered stable employment and the opportunity to continue helping patients. There was little reason for anyone at the time to view this career choice with suspicion. Like thousands of former military medical personnel, Cullen simply appeared to be continuing his professional education. He completed his studies and graduated in 1987, earning his nursing qualifications. Around the same period, he also established what outwardly appeared to be a conventional family life. He married Adrienne Baum, and together they would have 2 daughters. To neighbors, classmates, and future co-workers, Charles Cullen increasingly resembled an ordinary working professional. He was educated, employed, married, and raising children. Nothing about those basic facts hinted at the crimes that would later emerge. This contrast between appearance and reality became one of the defining characteristics of the entire case. Throughout his career, Cullen rarely drew attention to himself. He did not cultivate a dramatic personality. He did not seek public recognition. Instead, he often appeared dependable, hardworking, and willing to accept demanding assignments, particularly overnight shifts. Such qualities are generally admired within healthcare environments, where long hours and difficult schedules require dedication. It would be years before investigators recognized that these same circumstances also provided him with opportunities that few others questioned. Looking back from the perspective of history, it is tempting to search for obvious warning signs hidden within Cullen's childhood or early adulthood. The repeated losses, depression, suicide attempts, and social isolation certainly formed a tragic background. However, none of those experiences alone predicted what would eventually happen. Many people endure profound grief without ever harming another human being. Many struggle with mental illness while living compassionate and productive lives. It is important not to confuse hardship with destiny. The facts of Cullen's early life help explain the emotional landscape in which he lived, but they do not explain the deliberate decisions he would later make inside hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Those decisions belonged to him alone. By 1987, Charles Cullen had completed his nursing education and entered a profession built upon compassion, trust, and responsibility. Patients would soon depend upon his knowledge during some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Families would place enormous confidence in his care, believing that every medication administered and every decision made beside a hospital bed served one purpose: helping their loved ones recover. Within only a short time, Cullen would begin working at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. It would be his first hospital position as a registered nurse, and according to later investigations, it was there that the first unexplained deaths associated with his career began to appear. No one could yet imagine that a pattern was quietly taking shape, one that would continue for the next 16 years, cross multiple hospitals, claim countless victims, and ultimately become one of the darkest chapters in the history of American healthcare. By the time Charles Edmund Cullen graduated from the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing in 1987, he had survived a childhood marked by loss, years of depression, repeated suicide attempts, and a period of military service that had given him valuable medical training. On paper, he appeared to have overcome significant adversity. Nursing offered the possibility of a fresh start, a profession centered on compassion, discipline, and service. It was a career in which technical knowledge was matched by the responsibility to comfort frightened patients and support families through moments of profound uncertainty. For Cullen, however, this new beginning would eventually become something entirely different. The skills that were meant to preserve life would later be used in ways that no patient, coworker, or employer could have imagined. Hospitals operate on trust more than almost any other workplace. Physicians trust nurses to administer medications accurately. Nurses trust physicians to make informed clinical decisions. Patients trust everyone involved in their care because they often have little choice. They may not understand the names of the medications they receive or the purpose of every treatment, but they believe that every injection, every intravenous bag, and every pill is intended to improve their condition. This system functions only because its participants assume honesty and professionalism from one another. Charles Cullen entered that system as a newly qualified registered nurse, carrying with him the confidence of someone who had already received years of medical experience during his time in the United States Navy. Nothing in his professional qualifications suggested that he would become a danger to those under his care. After earning his nursing credentials, Cullen also appeared to settle into a relatively conventional personal life. He married Adrienne Baum, and together they had 2 daughters. From the outside, he resembled countless other young healthcare professionals beginning careers while building families. He had completed his education, found stable employment, and was preparing for the demanding routine that nursing required. Those who later examined his background often remarked on how ordinary this stage of his life appeared. There were no public scandals, no criminal accusations, and no obvious signs that would have prevented him from working in hospitals. To employers reviewing his application, he looked like a capable nurse with military medical experience, formal nursing education, and the willingness to work hard. His co-workers would soon form similar impressions. Throughout much of his career, Charles Cullen was described as quiet and reserved. He did not seek attention, nor was he known as an outspoken personality within the workplace. Instead, he developed a reputation for reliability. One characteristic repeatedly mentioned by colleagues was his willingness to volunteer for night shifts. Hospitals rely heavily on nurses willing to work overnight hours. When staffing levels are often lower and the demands of patient care remain constant despite fewer personnel being present. Night shifts require stamina, technical competence, and the ability to make important decisions under pressure. Cullen's readiness to accept those assignments made him appear dependable. Supervisors generally appreciate employees who consistently cover difficult schedules, and fellow nurses often value colleagues who share the burden of overnight work. At the time, few people saw anything unusual in his preference for those shifts. Only years later, after investigators reconstructed the timeline of his crimes, did this pattern acquire a darker significance. According to later investigations, the reduced staffing and quieter environment of overnight shifts often provided greater opportunities for Cullen to act without immediate scrutiny. At the beginning of his career, however, no one interpreted his work habits through that lens. He simply appeared committed to his profession. In 1988, Charles Cullen began working at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. It was his first hospital position as a registered nurse and the starting point of a career that would ultimately span approximately 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home over the next 16 years. St. Barnabas was a respected medical institution, treating patients with a wide range of illnesses and medical conditions. Like every hospital, it relied on teamwork, trust, and strict adherence to established procedures. New nurses were expected to learn quickly, integrate with experienced staff, and provide careful attention to patients. Cullen appeared capable of doing exactly that. He possessed medical knowledge, prior military experience, and formal nursing education. Nothing about his arrival immediately distinguished him from countless other nurses beginning there. Careers. Hospitals are environments where life and death exist side by side every day. A patient recovering from surgery may occupy one room, while another patient in critical condition fights for survival only a few steps away. Medical emergencies occur without warning. Cardiac arrests happen even when physicians have done everything correctly. Despite remarkable advances in medicine, death remains an unavoidable reality within healthcare. Because of this, healthcare professionals develop an understanding that not every outcome can be controlled. Families may ask why a loved one suddenly deteriorated despite signs of improvement. And sometimes medicine simply cannot provide a complete answer. This reality would become one of the factors that allowed Cullen's crimes to remain hidden for so long. When patients died unexpectedly, doctors naturally searched first for medical explanations rather than criminal ones. During Cullen's early period at St. Barnabas Medical Center, some patients who appeared stable unexpectedly suffered cardiac arrest. According to later investigations, these deaths eventually became part of a much larger pattern. At the time, however, they were viewed as isolated medical events. Hospitals regularly care for patients with complex illnesses, and sudden deterioration is not unheard of. Staff members responded as they always did during emergencies. Physicians attempted resuscitation. Nurses performed their duties. Families were informed of tragic outcomes. There was no immediate reason to believe that someone inside the hospital had intentionally caused those deaths. Looking back years later, Investigators would identify St. Barnabas as the place where Cullen's killing career likely began. But in 1988, no one possessed the broader perspective that history would later provide. Every unexplained death remained just that, unexplained. Without a recognizable pattern extending across multiple hospitals and multiple years, suspicion never fully crystallized around a single individual. Cullen continued working, earning experience, and establishing himself within the profession. As the months passed, he became increasingly familiar with hospital procedures, medication systems, and patient care routines. He understood how medications were stored, how intravenous treatments were administered, and how emergency responses unfolded when patients suddenly collapsed. Every healthcare institution depends upon nurses to carry out these responsibilities accurately. Because physicians cannot personally supervise every medication administered throughout the day. Nursing, therefore, requires significant independence and professional judgment. Patients rarely question routine procedures performed by nurses. Families generally assume that treatments are authorized and appropriate. This extraordinary level of trust forms the foundation of modern healthcare. But it also creates vulnerabilities if someone chooses to abuse that trust. According to the evidence later uncovered by investigators, Cullen eventually exploited precisely those vulnerabilities. The methods that would later define his crimes depended not on physical violence, but on medical access. He understood medications capable of affecting the cardiovascular system. He knew how intravenous lines functioned. He recognized that patients already hospitalized often had underlying illnesses capable of explaining sudden deterioration. At this early stage of his career, however, none of that knowledge appeared unusual. Every competent nurse receives similar education because those skills are essential for legitimate patient care. The tragedy lay not in the knowledge itself, but in how one individual would ultimately choose to use it. Outside the hospital, Cullen's personal life appeared increasingly stable. He was a husband and father, responsibilities that usually suggest long-term planning and emotional commitment. To neighbors and acquaintances, there was little reason to imagine that anything extraordinary was happening behind the walls of the hospitals where he worked. Many serial offenders maintain outwardly ordinary lives, allowing routine family responsibilities and employment to shield them from suspicion. Cullen fit that pattern remarkably well. His quiet personality further reduced attention. He did not cultivate a dramatic public image or display behavior that immediately alarmed those around him. Instead, he blended into the ordinary rhythms of hospital life. That ability to appear unremarkable became one of the most important factors in the longevity of his crimes. Healthcare workers frequently interact with dozens of colleagues during each shift. In busy hospitals, nurses rotate assignments, physicians cover different departments, and staff members rarely observe every aspect of another employee's work. Under such circumstances, a quiet, competent nurse seldom attracts unusual attention. Cullen benefited from precisely that environment. Every day, he walked the same corridors as countless dedicated healthcare professionals genuinely committed to saving lives. His uniform looked no different. His responsibilities appeared the same. Patients and families had no reason to fear him. They saw only another nurse performing routine medical duties. Yet beneath that appearance, according to the conclusions reached years later by investigators, a deadly pattern had already begun. What made the situation particularly tragic was that the earliest warning signs were extraordinarily difficult to recognize. An unexpected death inside a hospital rarely suggests murder. Patients are ill by definition. Some are critically ill. Others carry multiple medical conditions that can suddenly worsen despite appropriate treatment. Even experienced physicians sometimes struggle to explain why one patient declines while another recovers. As a result, isolated, unexpected deaths generally do not trigger criminal investigations. During Cullen's first years as a nurse, that assumption worked in his favor. No one yet recognized that these incidents would eventually connect hospitals across 2 states over. The course of 16 years. No centralized warning system alerted future employers. No comprehensive investigation followed him from one institution to another. At St. Barnabas Medical Center, the first pieces of what would become an enormous puzzle quietly fell into place without anyone realizing the full picture. The hospital remained focused on treating patients, managing emergencies, and carrying out its daily mission. Cullen continued working beside colleagues who believed they were sharing responsibilities with another dedicated nurse. The trust placed in him remained intact. It would take years, numerous unexplained deaths, and repeated institutional failures before that trust finally began to unravel. For Charles Cullen, St. Barnabas was only the beginning. As his career continued, he would move from one healthcare facility to another, carrying with him not only growing experience, but also a pattern of unexplained patient deaths that would become increasingly difficult to ignore. The questions raised at one hospital would quietly disappear when he left, only to emerge again somewhere else. What initially appeared to be isolated tragedies would slowly reveal themselves as part of something far larger, something that no single hospital could yet see, but that history would eventually remember as one of the darkest betrayals of medical trust in the United States. In 1988, Charles Edmund Cullen began working as a registered nurse at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. For the hospital, his arrival seemed routine. He was a trained nurse with prior medical experience from the United States Navy, a recent graduate of nursing school, and someone willing to take demanding shifts that many others preferred to avoid. Nothing in his employment suggested that he would eventually become the focus of one of the largest healthcare murder investigations in American history. Like countless nurses beginning their careers, Cullen entered an environment where every day revolved around caring for vulnerable patients. Every decision carried consequences. Every medication had to be administered carefully. Every emergency demanded immediate action. Hospitals operate continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and nurses serve as the constant presence at the bedside. Physicians examine patients, develop treatment plans, and perform procedures, but nurses remain with patients throughout the day and night, monitoring changes, administering medications, and responding when conditions suddenly deteriorate. Because of this role, nurses are entrusted with extraordinary responsibility. Patients often know their nurses better than their doctors. They speak with them more frequently, rely on them for reassurance, and trust them completely. Charles Cullen quickly became one of those trusted professionals. Colleagues generally viewed him as quiet, competent, and dependable. He was not known for seeking attention or creating conflict. Instead, he blended into the routines of hospital life with remarkable ease. His willingness to work night shifts reinforced the impression that he was a dedicated employee, willing to accept difficult assignments. In many hospitals, overnight staffing is smaller than during the day. Corridors become quieter, visiting hours end, and fewer family members remain at patients' bedsides. Nurses working those hours shoulder significant responsibility because they often have greater independence while caring for patients through the night. At the time, Cullen's preference for these shifts appeared to reflect commitment rather than anything suspicious. Looking back, however, investigators would later recognize that these working conditions often provided him with opportunities that were difficult to monitor. According to the evidence later assembled by investigators, it was during this early period at St. Barnabas Medical Center that the first unexplained patient deaths associated with Cullen's career began to occur. At the time, however, no one recognized a pattern. Hospitals are places where death, although deeply regrettable, remains a familiar reality. Even patients who appear stable can experience sudden complications. Heart rhythm disturbances, strokes, infections, or previously undetected medical conditions can rapidly transform a hopeful recovery into a medical emergency. Doctors and nurses understand that uncertainty accompanies even the best medical care. Because of this reality, An unexpected death inside a hospital rarely triggers immediate suspicion of criminal activity. When a patient suddenly suffers cardiac arrest, the first priority is resuscitation, not investigation. Teams rush into the room. Chest compressions begin. Emergency medications are administered. Physicians attempt to identify the cause while nurses perform their assigned roles with urgency and precision. If those efforts fail, attention naturally turns toward informing the family and documenting the medical events that occurred. Criminal intent is seldom among the first explanations considered. This environment of trust and medical complexity would become one of the defining features of the Cullen case. During his time at St. Barnabas, some patients who had shown signs of improvement unexpectedly went into cardiac arrest. According to later investigations, several of these individuals were not considered terminally ill. Some had been recovering. Others were medically stable. Their sudden deterioration surprised healthcare staff, but surprise alone did not imply foul play. Every experienced physician has encountered cases in which patients declined despite encouraging signs only hours earlier. Such events, while heartbreaking, are not unknown in medicine. Consequently, individual deaths did not immediately stand apart from the countless other tragedies that occur inside hospitals each year. What made the situation especially difficult to recognize was that each event appeared isolated. No one standing beside a hospital bed during a single medical emergency could see what would eventually unfold over 16 years across multiple institutions. There was no broader timeline available, no list connecting unexplained deaths from one hospital to another, and no centralized system tracking unusual mortality patterns associated with individual healthcare workers. Each hospital largely evaluated events within its own walls. If a patient died unexpectedly, physicians reviewed the medical facts available at that moment. Unless unmistakable evidence pointed toward criminal activity, the death was generally attributed to complications arising from illness. This assumption, reasonable under ordinary circumstances, became one of the factors that allowed Cullen's crimes to remain hidden for years. As Cullen settled into his responsibilities, he became increasingly familiar with every aspect of hospital routine. He understood medication storage systems, patient charts, intravenous therapy, emergency procedures, and the constant movement of healthcare personnel throughout each shift. Hospitals are highly organized yet extraordinarily busy environments. Nurses frequently care for multiple patients simultaneously while coordinating with physicians, pharmacists, respiratory therapists, and other medical staff. During emergencies, priorities shift rapidly. Under such conditions, coworkers naturally assume that every licensed professional is carrying out assigned responsibilities appropriately. Trust is not merely encouraged, it is essential. Without trust, modern healthcare cannot function. According to later investigations, Cullen exploited precisely that reality, although the full scope of his actions would not become apparent until years later. Investigators ultimately concluded that he used his medical knowledge to administer dangerous medications capable of causing fatal cardiac events. Among the drugs later associated with his crimes were digoxin, insulin, lidocaine, and epinephrine. Each has legitimate medical uses when prescribed correctly. Administered improperly or without authorization, however, they can have devastating consequences. Importantly, the effects of these medications could resemble natural medical deterioration, particularly among hospitalized patients already receiving complex treatment. This characteristic made recognizing deliberate harm extraordinarily difficult. At St. Barnabas Medical Center, however, no one yet understood how significant this fact would become. Healthcare professionals simply responded to emergencies as they always had, believing they were confronting tragic medical complications rather than intentional acts. As unexpected deaths accumulated, questions occasionally arose, but questions alone are not evidence. Medicine is filled with uncertainty, and unexpected outcomes are often investigated through clinical review rather than criminal inquiry. Staff members searched for medical explanations because that was the logical place to begin. Patients arrived with serious illnesses. Some required intensive treatment. Others carried underlying conditions capable of sudden deterioration. Without clear evidence of wrongdoing, there appeared little reason to suspect that someone inside the hospital was deliberately causing harm. This difficulty in distinguishing between natural death and homicide would later become one of the most unsettling lessons of the Cullen investigation. Looking back from the perspective of history, it is tempting to ask why no one immediately recognized what was happening. Yet such questions are easier to ask after the full picture has emerged. At the time, no physician, nurse, or hospital administrator possessed the knowledge investigators would eventually gather years later. They saw isolated events, not a 16-year pattern. They evaluated individual patients, not dozens of unexplained deaths spread across multiple healthcare facilities. Each unexplained cardiac arrest stood alone, disconnected from the next. Without those connections, suspicion rarely extended beyond ordinary medical review. Cullen continued working. His professional reputation remained largely intact. Colleagues still viewed him as dependable, and patients continued placing their trust in his care. Nothing outwardly distinguished him from the countless other nurses performing demanding work under stressful conditions. The confidence placed in him reflected the broader confidence society places in healthcare professionals every day. That trust is earned through education, licensing, ethical standards, and shared commitment to patient welfare. Cullen's ability to maintain that appearance became one of the central reasons his crimes continued. For so long, the earliest warning signs were subtle, fragmented, and easily explained away when viewed individually. There were no dramatic confrontations, no eyewitnesses accusing him of murder, and no immediate forensic evidence pointing toward deliberate poisoning. Instead, there were only patients who died unexpectedly and medical teams struggling to understand why. Over time, however, similar questions would begin appearing elsewhere. Cullen would not remain at St. Barnabas Medical Center forever. Like many healthcare professionals, he would eventually move to other employers. Under ordinary circumstances, changing hospitals would represent nothing more than career advancement or a search for better opportunities. In Cullen's case, those transitions would become a recurring pattern that investigators would later examine with increasing concern. According to the information uncovered years afterward, periods of growing suspicion or unusual mortality often preceded his departure from one institution and his arrival at another. Yet because hospitals rarely shared complete information regarding internal concerns, each new employer evaluated him largely as a new applicant rather than as someone whose previous workplaces had quietly begun asking difficult questions. This absence of comprehensive communication would prove devastating. Instead of ending at St. Barnabas, the pattern simply continued elsewhere. New patients replaced old ones. New colleagues welcomed an experienced nurse into their teams. New hospital administrators reviewed ordinary employment records rather than hidden suspicions. The questions left behind in one institution rarely followed him into the next. In retrospect, St. Barnabas Medical Center marked not only the beginning of Charles Cullen's nursing career, but also the beginning of a tragedy that would span 16 years and multiple healthcare facilities. The warning signs present during those first years were too limited to reveal the truth. Yet they represented the earliest pieces of a much larger puzzle. Only after investigators assembled evidence from numerous hospitals would those isolated incidents begin forming a recognizable pattern. Until then, Charles Cullen remained exactly what everyone believed him to be: a registered nurse entrusted with protecting life, working quietly among colleagues who had no reason to suspect that the greatest danger to some patients was not the illness that brought them to the hospital, but the person assigned to care for them. If Charles Cullen had remained at a single hospital throughout his career, the story might have ended very differently. A consistent pattern of unexplained patient deaths, medication irregularities, and repeated concerns surrounding one employee would likely have attracted increasing scrutiny over time. Instead, Cullen spent the next 16 years moving from one healthcare institution to another, leaving behind unanswered questions before beginning again somewhere new. This constant movement became one of the defining features of the case. It was not simply the actions of one individual that allowed the killings to continue for so long. It was also the absence of meaningful communication between institutions, the reluctance to escalate suspicions without definitive proof, and a healthcare system that often treated each hospital as an isolated world rather than part of a larger network. After his time at St. Barnabas Medical Center, Cullen continued his nursing career by accepting positions at other hospitals and healthcare facilities throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Over the course of 16 years, he worked at approximately 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home, including Warren Hospital, Hunterdon Medical Center, Morristown Memorial Hospital, Liberty Nursing Center, Easton Hospital, St. Luke's Hospital, and finally Somerset Medical Center. On paper, changing employers is not unusual within the nursing profession. Healthcare workers frequently relocate, pursue better opportunities, seek higher salaries, or accept positions closer to home. Viewed individually, each of Cullen's career moves appeared ordinary enough. Only after investigators reconstructed his employment history did an alarming pattern begin to emerge. Again and again, similar concerns surfaced wherever Cullen worked. Patients experienced sudden, unexplained cardiac arrests. Medication inventories revealed irregularities. Certain drugs appeared to be missing without clear documentation. Questions were raised about patient deaths that did not fit expected medical outcomes. Yet despite these recurring warning signs, no single hospital possessed enough information to recognize the broader picture. Each institution saw only the events unfolding within its own walls. None could fully appreciate that similar incidents had occurred before, and would occur again after Cullen moved on. At every new workplace, Cullen arrived carrying strong professional credentials. He had military medical experience, formal nursing education, and years of clinical practice. Future employers generally saw an experienced registered nurse rather than someone whose previous workplaces had quietly developed concerns. This happened because those concerns rarely followed him in a meaningful way. According to the information later revealed during investigations, hospitals often chose not to provide detailed warnings to prospective employers. Instead, employment verification frequently consisted of confirming dates of service or other basic information. The suspicions that had arisen internally remained largely internal. This failure to communicate became one of the most significant institutional shortcomings, highlighted by the case. As Cullen settled into each new hospital, the cycle repeated itself. Initially, nothing appeared unusual. He blended into existing nursing teams, performed routine duties, and continued building the reputation of a quiet, dependable employee. Coworkers often described him as calm and willing to work demanding schedules, particularly overnight shifts. Patients and families saw only another healthcare professional performing ordinary nursing responsibilities. Meanwhile, according to later investigations, unexplained patient deaths gradually began to occur once again. Because hospitals naturally care for critically ill individuals, isolated, unexpected deaths rarely generated immediate suspicion. Doctors searched for medical explanations. Nurses responded to emergencies. Administrators reviewed individual incidents. Without clear evidence of criminal intent, each event remained largely disconnected from the next. Cullen benefited enormously from this environment. The absence of a centralized system tracking unusual mortality associated with individual healthcare workers meant that no institution could easily compare its experiences with those of previous employers. Questions that arose in one hospital effectively disappeared when Cullen resigned or was dismissed. At his next job, he was once again simply an experienced nurse beginning a new position. One of the most troubling aspects of the case was how consistently this pattern repeated itself. According to the information available, whenever mortality rates increased unexpectedly, Medication discrepancies became noticeable, or hospital staff began questioning unusual events. Cullen often left that institution. Sometimes he resigned voluntarily. In other situations, he was dismissed or encouraged to leave. Yet, regardless of how his employment ended, the outcome remained remarkably similar. Rather than triggering criminal investigations or comprehensive warnings to future employers, his departure usually marked the conclusion of the matter. The next hospital would hire him without understanding the concerns left behind elsewhere. This repeated cycle transformed each resignation into an opportunity for the killings to continue. Investigators later concluded that institutional hesitation played a significant role in allowing Cullen to remain employed across multiple healthcare facilities. Hospitals faced difficult decisions whenever suspicions emerged. Direct evidence linking unexpected patient deaths to intentional misconduct was often absent. Medical complications remained plausible explanations. Administrators also confronted concerns about legal liability and reputational damage. Publicly accusing a nurse of causing patient deaths without definitive proof carried enormous legal risks. Likewise, acknowledging that suspicious deaths had occurred within a hospital threatened public confidence in the institution itself. As a result, some employers chose the path they believed carried the least immediate risk. Allowing Cullen to leave rather than pursuing aggressive action they feared might not withstand legal scrutiny. From the perspective of later investigators, however, these decisions had devastating long-term consequences. Every hospital viewed its situation independently, focusing on resolving immediate concerns within its own organization. Few recognized that failing to communicate openly with future employers effectively transferred the problem elsewhere. Each institution believed the issue ended when Cullen walked out the door. In reality, it merely changed locations. Patients at the next hospital entered treatment completely unaware that questions had already followed the nurse assigned to care for them. This failure of communication has since been recognized as one of the defining lessons of the Cullen case. The healthcare system depended heavily upon trust, both between professionals and between institutions. Employment references assumed honesty. Licensing reflected professional standards. Hospitals expected that significant concerns would be disclosed appropriately. When that system failed to transmit crucial information, Cullen continued moving almost unnoticed from one opportunity to another. Looking back, investigators described the sequence almost like a repeating script. Cullen would begin work at a new facility. Over time, unusual deaths or medication irregularities would begin attracting quiet attention. Internal questions would emerge. Administrators might review incidents or notice troubling patterns. Before those concerns developed into decisive action, Cullen would leave. The cycle would then begin again somewhere else. No single hospital witnessed the entire story unfold. Only years later, after investigators assembled employment records spanning more than a decade, did the repetition become unmistakable. During these years, the victims remained largely invisible to one another. Families grieving unexpected hospital deaths had no reason to suspect their experiences resembled tragedies occurring hundreds of miles away. One family believed they had suffered an isolated medical loss. Another accepted physicians' explanations for an unexpected cardiac arrest. Another struggled to understand how a loved one who had appeared to be improving could suddenly die. None of them knew that similar questions were being asked by other families in other hospitals under remarkably similar circumstances. Their experiences remained separated by geography, time, and institutional boundaries. This fragmentation became another reason the broader pattern remained hidden. Investigators later emphasized that Cullen's victims were not limited to individuals already facing certain death. According to the information provided during the investigation, many patients were recovering. Some were preparing for discharge. Others had not been considered terminally ill. These facts fundamentally challenged Cullen's later claim that he believed he was relieving suffering. If patients were expected to recover or return home, The explanation that he acted out of mercy became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the evidence. Instead, investigators found themselves confronting a far more disturbing possibility: that medical knowledge and professional trust had been deliberately exploited to end lives that otherwise might have continued. Throughout these 16 years, Cullen accumulated not only clinical experience, but also familiarity with the systems governing modern healthcare. Every hospital maintained procedures for storing medications, documenting treatments, and responding to emergencies. Yet despite differences between institutions, the underlying principles remained remarkably consistent. Licensed nurses enjoyed significant professional autonomy because healthcare depends upon trained professionals making timely decisions. This autonomy is essential for effective patient care. It also assumes that those entrusted with such responsibility will exercise it ethically. Cullen repeatedly violated that assumption while continuing to benefit from the trust it created. As investigators later pieced together his employment history, they began recognizing that the true story extended far beyond one individual. The case exposed weaknesses that reached across the healthcare system itself. Hospitals had focused primarily on protecting their own institutions rather than recognizing their shared responsibility to future patients elsewhere. Information that might have raised questions during hiring often remained confidential. Internal concerns were not always communicated fully. Consequently, warning signs accumulated slowly across years and across state lines without ever forming a complete picture until it was almost too late. By the early 2000s, Charles Cullen had already worked at numerous healthcare facilities, carrying with him a history that few employers truly understood. The questions surrounding unexplained patient deaths continued to follow a familiar pattern. But no institution had yet gathered enough evidence to stop him permanently. That would finally begin to change only after Cullen arrived at Somerset Medical Center, where an unusual series of patient deaths, unexpected laboratory findings, and increasingly careful scrutiny would ultimately bring 16 years of hidden violence to an end. The cycle that had repeated itself across hospital after hospital was approaching its final chapter. And for the first time, the scattered pieces of the puzzle were about to come together. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Charles Cullen case was not simply the number of lives believed to have been taken, but the method by which those deaths occurred. Unlike many serial killers whose crimes involve obvious physical violence, Cullen relied on knowledge that had been acquired through years of medical training and professional experience. He did not carry conventional weapons. He did not force entry into homes or attack strangers in public places. Instead, according to the investigation, he worked inside hospitals where patients were already vulnerable, surrounded by life-saving equipment, highly trained medical professionals, and medications intended to heal rather than harm. It was this setting that made his crimes exceptionally difficult to detect. Modern hospitals depend upon a vast range of powerful medications. Every day, physicians prescribe drugs capable of dramatically altering heart rhythms, blood pressure, blood sugar, and countless other biological functions. Used appropriately, these medications save lives. Used incorrectly or without medical necessity, they can become extremely dangerous. Nurses play an essential role in administering these treatments. Patients generally trust that every medication they receive has been prescribed for a legitimate medical reason, and families rarely question routine nursing procedures because they assume every action follows established medical protocols. Charles Cullen understood this environment thoroughly. His years in the United States Navy had introduced him to emergency medicine and patient care, while nursing school had expanded his clinical knowledge. During more than a decade working in hospitals, he became increasingly familiar with medication systems, intravenous therapy, and the rhythms of hospital life. Investigators later concluded that he exploited this expertise to commit murders in ways that frequently appeared to be natural medical emergencies. According to the evidence presented after his arrest, Cullen commonly used several medications during his crimes, including digoxin, insulin, lidocaine, and epinephrine. Each of these drugs serves an important purpose in legitimate medical treatment. Digoxin is prescribed for certain heart conditions and can help regulate cardiac function when used correctly. Insulin is vital for managing blood glucose levels in patients with diabetes. Lidocaine is used in medical settings for specific cardiac rhythm disturbances as well as other clinical purposes. Epinephrine is one of the most important emergency medications in modern medicine, capable of helping revive patients during life-threatening situations when administered appropriately. The tragedy in Cullen's case was that these medications were allegedly administered outside legitimate treatment plans. Investigators determined that he often introduced drugs directly into a patient's intravenous line, or secretly injected them into intravenous fluid bags. Because many hospitalized patients already had access for fluids or medications, these methods could be carried out without immediately attracting attention to observers, and line represented an ordinary part of medical care. Patients receiving treatment expected nurses to adjust equipment, administer medications, and monitor intravenous therapy throughout the day. Those routine responsibilities formed the foundation of trust upon which hospital care depends. Cullen allegedly transformed that trust into an opportunity for murder. The choice of medications was particularly significant because their effects could resemble naturally occurring medical complications. For example, according to the investigation, excessive digoxin could produce dangerous disturbances in heart rhythm leading to cardiac arrest. A patient who suddenly experienced such an event inside a hospital might appear to have suffered an unexpected medical deterioration rather than deliberate poisoning. Similarly, investigators stated that unauthorized insulin administration could cause blood sugar levels to fall dramatically, resulting in seizures, coma, brain injury, or death if not recognized and treated in time. Again, because hospitalized patients often experience complex medical conditions, these outcomes were not always immediately attributed to criminal conduct. The same principle applied to lidocaine and epinephrine when administered outside appropriate medical circumstances. Investigators believe that Cullen selected methods capable of producing fatal emergencies while blending into the clinical realities of hospital medicine. According to the information gathered during the investigation, many of Cullen's victims shared certain characteristics. Some were elderly, others were patients in intensive care units, some were asleep, others had no family members present at the bedside during crucial moments. Yet one of the most important findings was that many victims were not actively dying. Several patients were recovering from illness. Some had improved enough that discharge from the hospital was being considered. Others had stable medical conditions with positive expectations for recovery. These facts became especially important later, when Cullen attempted to explain his actions by claiming he believed he was ending suffering. Investigators found that explanation difficult to reconcile with the medical records. If patients were expected to recover or return home, describing their deaths as acts of mercy became increasingly implausible. The methods described by investigators were notable not because they involved extraordinary technical sophistication, but because they exploited ordinary hospital procedures. According to the evidence, Cullen would first ensure that circumstances allowed him to act without attracting immediate attention. He then obtained medications through hospital systems and administered them either directly into intravenous lines or by introducing them into 4 fluid bags. Once the medication entered the patient's circulation, he could leave the room appearing to have completed routine nursing responsibilities. If the patient's condition deteriorated shortly afterward, the event initially appeared to be another unexpected medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. One particularly disturbing aspect of the case was that Cullen was often among the first healthcare professionals to respond when patients suddenly collapsed. According to the information later uncovered, he sometimes participated in emergency resuscitation efforts after allegedly causing the medical crisis himself. To coworkers witnessing these events, his actions reinforced the image of a dedicated nurse responding quickly during emergencies. In hospital settings, Nurses who react rapidly to cardiac arrests are generally viewed as committed professionals acting in the best interests of their patients. Few would imagine that the individual attempting resuscitation might also have initiated the emergency moments earlier. This paradox contributed significantly to Cullen's ability to avoid suspicion for so many years. Healthcare professionals naturally evaluated his visible behavior rather than events they had no reason to suspect had occurred beforehand. Another reason the crimes remained concealed was the environment in which they occurred. Hospitals care for individuals with serious illnesses, multiple medical conditions, and unpredictable clinical courses. Even patients who appear stable can deteriorate unexpectedly. Physicians understand that complications sometimes arise despite appropriate treatment. Families often accept these explanations because they recognize the uncertainty inherent in medicine. Cullen's alleged actions blended into this uncertainty. Instead of creating scenes that obviously suggested homicide, the deaths frequently resembled tragic but medically plausible outcomes. Investigators later concluded that this similarity to natural illness became one of the strongest factors delaying recognition of the broader pattern. Over time, however, subtle warning signs began appearing. Hospitals noticed unusual medication discrepancies. Certain drugs seemed to disappear from inventories without satisfactory explanations. Some intravenous fluid bags showed indications of having been tampered with. Doctors observed cardiac arrests that lacked clear medical causes. Individually, each concern could potentially be explained. Medication errors occur in busy hospitals. Equipment occasionally malfunctions. Patients sometimes deteriorate unexpectedly despite excellent care. Yet, as investigators later assembled information from multiple institutions, these isolated observations began aligning into a pattern that had previously remained invisible. One particularly troubling account described in the investigation involved an elderly patient who reportedly told his son that a nurse who was not assigned to his care had entered the room and administered an injection. The patient died the following day. At the time, however, the incident did not result in criminal charges. Cullen and other staff members reportedly passed polygraph examinations, and without stronger evidence, the matter went no further. Looking back after Cullen's arrest, investigators viewed this episode as another missed opportunity to identify the danger earlier. Yet even this incident illustrates how difficult the case was to unravel. A single statement, absent additional corroborating evidence, proved insufficient to establish criminal responsibility. The investigation repeatedly encountered this problem: isolated concerns without enough direct proof to support prosecution. As Cullen moved from one hospital to another, the same methods continued generating the same kinds of unexplained medical emergencies. Patients who had been recovering suddenly entered cardiac arrest. Individuals not considered terminal died unexpectedly. Medication irregularities surfaced. Internal questions were raised. Yet because hospitals largely examined these events independently, no one immediately recognized how closely they resembled incidents occurring elsewhere. The method itself remained remarkably consistent because it depended upon the universal structure of hospital care rather than unique circumstances at any single institution. Every hospital used intravenous therapy. Every hospital stored high-risk medications. Every hospital relied on professional trust among its staff. Cullen allegedly exploited those common features wherever he worked. The significance of his methods extended beyond the individual crimes. They exposed vulnerabilities within modern healthcare that few had previously considered. Hospitals are designed to provide rapid access to life-saving medications because delays can cost lives. Nurses are granted significant professional responsibility because patient care requires timely clinical judgment. Medication systems function efficiently because healthcare professionals are expected to follow ethical and legal standards. Cullen's alleged actions demonstrated how devastating the consequences could become when one individual deliberately violated those expectations. Yet it is equally important to remember that the overwhelming majority of healthcare workers dedicate their careers to protecting patients. The Cullen case became infamous precisely because it represented such a profound betrayal of the values upon which medicine depends. His methods did not reveal flaws in nursing as a profession. They revealed the extraordinary damage that can occur when professional trust is abused over many years without detection. By the early 2000s, however, the pattern of unexplained deaths and medication irregularities was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. At Somerset Medical Center, physicians began noticing patients with dangerously elevated digoxin levels despite the absence of any medical orders authorizing the drug. Stable patients unexpectedly suffered fatal cardiac events. Investigators would soon begin examining medication records, patient histories, and staffing information with unprecedented attention. For the first time in 16 years, the methods that had remained hidden behind the ordinary routines of hospital life were about to face systematic scrutiny. And the careful illusion that had protected Charles Cullen for so long was beginning to unravel. By the time Charles Cullen had spent years moving between hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, the unexplained deaths associated with his career were no longer isolated tragedies viewed only through the lens of individual patient histories. Small warning signs had begun to appear in different places at different times and in different forms. On their own, each incident seemed capable of explanation. Hospitals are complicated environments where critically ill patients can deteriorate unexpectedly. Medications are administered around the clock, and medical emergencies occur without warning. Yet when investigators later reconstructed the full timeline after Cullen's arrest, these scattered incidents formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The tragedy was not that warning signs failed to exist. The tragedy was that no single institution ever possessed enough information or acted decisively enough to recognize what those warnings truly meant. Throughout the 1990s, several hospitals where Cullen worked began noticing unusual developments surrounding patient care. According to the information later assembled during the investigation, one of the earliest concerns involved unexpectedly high mortality rates. Hospital administrators and medical staff observed that certain units experienced more patient deaths than anticipated. At first, these numbers did not immediately suggest criminal activity. Every hospital serves different patient populations. Some departments naturally treat more critically ill individuals than others, and fluctuations in mortality are not uncommon. Physicians generally searched for clinical explanations before considering anything more sinister. They reviewed diagnoses, treatment plans, and underlying medical conditions because those remained the most reasonable explanations available. Nevertheless, the questions persisted. Why were some patients suffering sudden cardiac arrest despite appearing relatively stable? Why were individuals expected to recover suddenly dying without obvious medical causes? Although these questions did not immediately produce answers, they represented the beginning of a growing unease that quietly followed Cullen from one institution to the next. Alongside concerns about patient deaths, hospitals also began encountering irregularities involving medications. Investigators later found that some facilities reported drugs appearing to go missing without satisfactory explanations. In other instances, intravenous fluid bags displayed signs suggesting they had been tampered with. Within a busy hospital, however, such irregularities are not always easy to interpret. Medication errors can occur. Documentation mistakes happen. Equipment occasionally malfunctions. Healthcare professionals work under constant pressure while managing multiple patients simultaneously, making isolated discrepancies difficult to evaluate in isolation. Administrators, therefore, tended to examine these events as individual operational problems rather than pieces of a broader criminal pattern. Once again, no one yet understood that similar concerns had arisen elsewhere wherever Cullen had previously worked. Among the most unsettling incidents described in the investigation involved an elderly patient who reportedly shared an unusual concern with his son. According to the account preserved in later reports, the patient stated that a nurse who was not assigned to his care had entered the room and administered an injection. Shortly afterward, the patient died. At the time, this statement understandably attracted attention. Family members naturally questioned why an unfamiliar nurse would administer medication. Yet suspicion alone was insufficient to establish criminal responsibility. Investigators questioned staff members, including Charles Cullen. According to the available information, Cullen and other employees passed polygraph examinations conducted during that period. Without stronger evidence linking any specific individual to intentional wrongdoing, the investigation stalled. No criminal charges followed. Looking back after Cullen's eventual confession, this episode would be remembered as one of several opportunities that, in retrospect, appeared far more significant than they seemed at the time. It illustrated how extraordinarily difficult it was to distinguish between suspicion and proof. Inside a functioning hospital, a patient's recollection, however concerning, could not by itself overcome the absence of direct evidence. Similar patterns unfolded elsewhere. As unusual deaths accumulated, some hospitals quietly began questioning whether something was wrong. Physicians noticed cardiac arrests they struggled to explain medically. Nurses discussed unexpected deteriorations that seemed inconsistent with patients' apparent recoveries. Administrators reviewed mortality statistics and medication records. Yet every institution confronted the same obstacle: uncertainty. Hospitals exist precisely because patients are ill. Death, although deeply tragic, remains an unavoidable part of medical care. Even experienced physicians sometimes cannot fully explain why one patient survives while another does not. Consequently, unusual outcomes generally triggered medical reviews rather than criminal investigations. Without eyewitnesses, surveillance evidence, or unmistakable forensic proof, administrators often found themselves unable to move beyond suspicion. According to the investigation, another critical factor prevented the warning signs from becoming a unified picture. Hospitals frequently handle concerns internally rather than communicating them comprehensively to future employers. When questions arose surrounding Cullen's employment, institutions often faced difficult choices. Publicly accusing a nurse of intentionally harming patients without definitive evidence carried obvious legal risks. Hospitals also worried about protecting their reputations. Acknowledging the possibility that suspicious deaths had occurred within their facilities could undermine public confidence, damage community trust, and expose the institution to significant legal consequences. Faced with these competing pressures, some employers chose an approach that appeared safer in the short term. Rather than reporting every concern in detail or involving law enforcement immediately, they simply allowed Cullen to resign or terminated his employment quietly. When future hospitals requested employment information, responses often confirmed only basic details such as dates of employment instead of disclosing unresolved suspicions. Each institution believed it had resolved its immediate problem. In reality, the danger merely relocated to another hospital. Investigators would later identify this repeated failure to communicate as one of the most devastating institutional shortcomings revealed by the case. Had comprehensive information accompanied Cullen from one employer to the next, patterns might have emerged much earlier. Instead, every hospital effectively started from the beginning, evaluating Cullen as though previous concerns did not exist. The result was a cycle that repeated itself over 16 years. Questions surfaced. Cullen departed. Another hospital hired him. New patients unknowingly entered his care. The same types of unexplained events eventually appeared again. Looking back, investigators realized that no single warning sign had been decisive. Rather, it was the accumulation of many small irregularities that ultimately revealed the truth. Individually, a missing medication might represent a documentation error. An unexplained cardiac arrest might reflect natural disease. A tampered intravenous bag might appear to be an isolated incident. A patient's unusual statement might remain impossible to verify. Together, however, these events formed a pattern that extended far beyond coincidence. The difficulty was that no one possessed the complete picture while Cullen remained actively employed. Every hospital held only a few pieces of an enormous puzzle. Another reason the pattern remained hidden involved the nature of Cullen's victims. According to investigators, many were already hospitalized for legitimate medical reasons. Some were elderly, others required ongoing treatment. Because these patients already suffered from illness, unexpected deterioration generally appeared medically plausible. Families often accepted physicians' explanations because they trusted the expertise of healthcare professionals and recognized that medicine cannot guarantee recovery. Few imagined that a trusted nurse might have deliberately altered the course of treatment. This assumption reflected not naivety, but the fundamental trust upon which healthcare depends. Without that trust, hospitals could not function effectively. Cullen allegedly exploited precisely that confidence. Throughout these years, Cullen himself continued presenting the image of a dependable healthcare professional. Coworkers described him as quiet, calm, and willing to accept difficult assignments. He frequently worked night shifts, where staffing levels were lower and family visitation less common. From the perspective of those around him, he appeared dedicated rather than suspicious. When emergencies occurred, he often participated in efforts to save patients, reinforcing the perception that he was committed to their care. Nothing in his outward demeanor immediately suggested someone capable of orchestrating the very crises he later helped address. This contrast between appearance and reality remains one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. The same professional qualities that inspired trust also shielded him from suspicion. By the early 2000s, however, the cumulative weight of unexplained events was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Although previous hospitals had not fully connected the warning signs, circumstances were beginning to change. Medical record systems had improved. Medication tracking became more detailed in some facilities. Individual physicians started noticing laboratory findings that did not match prescribed treatments. Most importantly, Somerset Medical Center would soon encounter a series of patient deaths that could no longer be explained solely by ordinary medical uncertainty. There, investigators would eventually discover patients with extraordinarily high levels of digoxin despite the absence of any physician's order authorizing the medication. This discrepancy represented something fundamentally different from previous warning signs. Instead of relying only on statistical patterns or unexplained outcomes, investigators now possessed objective laboratory evidence suggesting that medications had entered patients' bodies without legitimate medical justification. For the first time, the scattered concerns accumulated over 16 years began converging into a coherent investigation. The quiet questions that had lingered in hospital corridors for years were finally about to receive systematic attention. Physicians, administrators, and law enforcement would soon begin examining medication records, patient histories, and staff schedules with unprecedented scrutiny. The warning signs that no one had previously connected were about to become the foundation of one of the most consequential healthcare investigations in American history. Charles Cullen had spent 16 years relying on the assumption that unexplained deaths inside hospitals would remain exactly that, unexplained. At Somerset Medical Center, that assumption was about to collapse. By 2003, Charles Cullen had spent approximately 15 years working inside hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. During that time, he had moved repeatedly between healthcare facilities, leaving behind questions that were never fully answered and concerns that rarely traveled with him. Each transition allowed him to begin again. Each new workplace saw him primarily as an experienced registered nurse rather than as someone connected to previous unexplained events. But when Cullen arrived at Somerset Medical Center, the circumstances surrounding him began to change. For the first time, The warning signs that had appeared separately over many years began to converge into a focused investigation. At Somerset, doctors and administrators encountered patient deaths that seemed increasingly difficult to explain through ordinary medical causes. Some patients who had been improving suddenly suffered fatal cardiac events. Others appeared stable and were expected to continue recovering. Yet their conditions rapidly deteriorated. In a hospital where medical teams were accustomed to facing uncertainty every day, these cases stood out because something about them did not fit. Physicians began asking questions that had remained unanswered in previous institutions. Why were patients who seemed to be improving suddenly dying? Why were certain cardiac events occurring without a clear medical explanation? Why did some laboratory results suggest the presence of medications that had not been prescribed? The turning point came when investigators discovered unusual digoxin levels in certain patients. Digoxin is a medication used in the treatment of specific heart conditions, but the patients in question had no documented medical reason to receive it. Elevated levels of the drug can be extremely dangerous and may lead to serious heart rhythm problems and death. The discovery immediately changed the nature of the investigation. Previously, concerns surrounding Cullen had often involved patterns, suspicions, and unexplained outcomes. Now, there was a more concrete piece of evidence. A medication was present in patients' bodies despite no legitimate order indicating it should have been administered. This finding suggested that something more than natural medical complications might be occurring. Inside the hospital, investigators began examining patient records, medication access information, and the timing of Cullen's shifts. They looked for connections between the moments when patients deteriorated and Cullen's presence in the hospital. As they reviewed the information, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Cullen was repeatedly present around patients who experienced unexpected cardiac events. The investigation did not depend on one single piece of evidence. Instead, it developed through the combination of laboratory results, medication records, patient histories, and employment information. Each element strengthened the possibility that Cullen had used his position as a nurse to intentionally harm patients. Yet investigators still faced the challenge of proving what had happened. Hospitals contain thousands of interactions between staff members and patients. Nurses enter rooms constantly. Medications are administered throughout the day and night. Establishing that a specific individual intentionally caused a patient's death requires evidence far beyond suspicion. The investigation needed someone who understood Cullen personally, someone who could help uncover his thoughts and behavior while also assisting law enforcement in gathering stronger evidence. That person was Amy Luffrin, a nurse who worked with Cullen at Somerset Medical Center. Amy Luffrin had known Cullen as a colleague. Like many others, she initially saw him as a quiet and professional coworker. He did not appear outwardly threatening. He was not someone who attracted attention or created obvious conflict. He presented himself as a calm healthcare worker who understood the responsibilities of nursing. However, as concerns surrounding patient deaths increased, Amy became one of the people who helped investigators understand the reality behind Cullen's public image. According to the investigation, Amy noticed certain behaviors that raised questions. Cullen seemed to appear frequently around patients whose conditions suddenly worsened. His calmness during emergencies appeared unusual when viewed alongside the growing suspicions surrounding him. Although she had worked alongside him, she eventually became willing to cooperate with investigators because of the seriousness of the situation. Her involvement became one of the most important developments in the case. Investigators asked Amy to assist them by secretly recording conversations with Cullen. These conversations were intended to gather evidence and better understand his actions. This placed Amy in an extremely difficult position. She was not simply assisting an investigation against a stranger. She was speaking with someone she knew professionally, someone who had shared hospital shifts with her and existed within the same professional community. The situation required her to balance personal familiarity with the responsibility of helping determine whether patients had been harmed. The recordings became a crucial part of the investigation. Through these conversations, investigators gained insight into Cullen's statements and behavior. Eventually, the pressure of the investigation and the evidence being collected led Cullen to begin admitting responsibility for his actions. On December 15, 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested. The arrest marked the end of a 16-year period during which investigators believed he had killed numerous patients while working in hospitals. After his arrest, Cullen began providing information about his crimes. During questioning, he admitted to killing patients over many years. The number he provided was not precise. He reportedly acknowledged approximately 30 to 40 murders, although investigators continued examining records to determine the true number of victims. The uncertainty surrounding the victim count became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Cullen himself could not provide a complete list of every person he had killed. Years of repeated actions across multiple hospitals made it difficult to identify each individual case. Some medical records no longer contained enough evidence to confirm what had happened. Some deaths had originally been attributed to natural causes. Some families had never known that their loved ones might have been victims of a deliberate act. Investigators ultimately confirmed 29 victims officially connected to Cullen's crimes. However, many believe the actual number was significantly higher. Some investigators estimated that more than 100 deaths could potentially be linked to him. Other experts suggested the possibility that the number could approach 400, which would make Cullen one of the most prolific healthcare-related killers in American history. These estimates remained uncertain because proving each individual case required evidence that was often unavailable. The hospital environment that had allowed Cullen to hide his actions for so long also created difficulties in determining the full extent of his crimes. Patient deaths occurred in medical settings where illness and complications were common. Explanations. Records from years earlier were not always complete. Without direct evidence, investigators could not officially classify every suspicious death as a murder. This uncertainty left many families with painful questions that might never receive complete answers. During interviews after his arrest, Cullen attempted to explain his actions by claiming that he believed he was ending patients' suffering. He suggested that he acted because he wanted to help people who were experiencing pain. However, investigators found this explanation deeply troubling because many victims were not near death. Some were recovering. Some were expected to leave the hospital. Their deaths could not easily be interpreted as acts of mercy. Even Cullen eventually acknowledged that his actions could not truly be justified. The contrast between his explanation and the reality of the victim's conditions became one of the central questions surrounding his motives. Why would a nurse entrusted with protecting patients decide that he had the right to end their lives? Why did he continue for so many years? These questions remain difficult to answer completely. Psychological evaluations and expert analysis suggested that multiple factors may have contributed, including long-term emotional problems, a desire for control, and severe psychological disturbances. However, no single explanation fully accounted for his behavior. The investigation into Cullen was not only about identifying a murderer. It was also about examining how such crimes could continue inside hospitals for so long. His arrest forced medical institutions across the United States to confront uncomfortable questions about hiring practices, employee monitoring, medication security, and communication between healthcare facilities. The case revealed that preventing future tragedies required more than identifying dangerous individuals after crimes occurred. It required stronger systems capable of recognizing warning signs before they became irreversible. With Cullen finally in custody, the investigation moved from discovery to prosecution. Families who had lost loved ones prepared to face the man responsible for their pain. Prosecutors began building cases based on his admissions and available evidence. The healthcare system began examining its own failures. For years, Charles Cullen had hidden behind the trust given to him as a nurse. Now, that same trust had become the foundation upon which investigators built the case against him. The quiet pattern that had traveled from hospital to hospital had finally been exposed. The unanswered questions that began with unexplained deaths in medical wards had led to one of the most significant criminal investigations involving a healthcare professional in American history. The end of Cullen's career in nursing was not merely the arrest of one individual. It represented the collapse of a deception that had lasted 16 years and the beginning of a national conversation about protecting patients from the people they trusted most. After Charles Cullen was arrested on December 15, 2003, the investigation that had uncovered years of unexplained patient deaths entered a new and painful phase. For law enforcement officials, the focus shifted from proving that Cullen had harmed patients to determining the full extent of what he had done. For families who had lost loved ones, the arrest brought a mixture of emotions. There was relief that the person responsible was finally identified, but there was also grief, anger, and uncertainty. Many families had spent years believing their relatives had died from natural medical complications. The possibility that their final moments had involved deliberate harm created a new layer of suffering that was difficult to process. The case of Charles Cullen was not only about a criminal investigation. It was about hundreds of unanswered questions surrounding trust, responsibility, and the obligations of the healthcare system. In the months following his arrest, investigators continued examining Cullen's history across the many hospitals where he had worked. They reviewed patient records, employment files, medication information, and the circumstances surrounding deaths that had previously appeared unexplained. The challenge was enormous. Cullen had worked in multiple facilities over approximately 16 years. During that time, many patients had died under his care, but not every death could be conclusively connected to him. Hospitals treat patients who are often seriously ill, and determining whether a death resulted from natural causes or deliberate action requires strong evidence. Investigators, therefore, had to separate confirmed victims from suspected cases. Cullen himself complicated the process because he could not provide a complete account of every person he had killed. During questioning, he admitted to numerous murders but was unable to identify every victim. He reportedly confessed to killing approximately 30 to 40 patients, but the official number of confirmed victims remained lower. Investigators eventually established 29 confirmed victims connected to Cullen's crimes. However, they continued to believe that the true number could be significantly higher. Some investigators suggested that more than 100 deaths might be linked to him. Other estimates went even further, with some experts suggesting that the number could potentially approach 400. These larger estimates reflected the extraordinary difficulty of investigating crimes committed inside medical environments, where evidence disappears with time and where many deaths initially appear medically explainable. The uncertainty surrounding the victim count became one of the most painful elements of the case. Every unidentified victim represented a family that might never receive a complete explanation. Every unresolved death represented another unanswered question. For some families, confirmation that Cullen was responsible brought a terrible form of closure. They finally understood why a loved one who seemed to be improving had suddenly died. For others, uncertainty remained because there was not enough evidence to officially connect their family member's death to Cullen. The difference between suspicion and proof created a painful divide between what investigators believed may have happened and what they could legally establish. During the legal process, Cullen repeatedly entered guilty pleas in connection with his crimes, rather than facing a single trial covering every suspected murder. Prosecutors pursued individual cases where sufficient evidence existed. The legal strategy reflected the difficulty of proving every alleged killing. In criminal courts, accusations must be supported by evidence that meets legal standards. While investigators believed Cullen was responsible for many more deaths than those officially charged, the justice system could only proceed with cases that could be demonstrated through available evidence. The families of victims played an important role during the sentencing process. Many relatives came to court to confront the man who had taken their loved ones away. For them, The courtroom was not simply a place where legal arguments occurred. It was the place where they could finally speak directly about the human cost behind the investigation. Behind every number was an individual person, a parent, a spouse, a relative, or a friend whose life had ended while receiving medical care. The victims were not statistics. They were people who entered hospitals expecting treatment, comfort, and protection. Instead, according to prosecutors and investigators, they became victims of someone who had been trusted to care for them. Cullen's own statements during the legal process did little to resolve the questions surrounding his motives. He claimed that he believed he was ending suffering, but this explanation remained controversial because many victims were not near death. Some had been recovering, some had shown signs of improvement. Some were expected to leave the hospital. These facts challenged the idea that his actions were motivated solely by compassion. Instead, investigators and experts considered other possible factors, including psychological problems, a desire for control, and a distorted perception of his role in patients' lives. Yet even after extensive investigation, no single explanation fully answered why Cullen committed such crimes for such a long period. One of the most significant aspects of the sentencing was the severity of the punishment. Cullen received 18 consecutive life sentences. The sentence ensured that he would never return to society and reflected the extraordinary number of lives affected by his actions. The punishment also represented the justice system's recognition that his crimes were not isolated incidents, but part of a prolonged pattern of violence against vulnerable patients. During sentencing proceedings, family members had the opportunity to describe the impact of their losses. Their statements highlighted not only the deaths themselves, but also the betrayal they experienced. Hospitals are places where people seek help during moments of fear and vulnerability. Patients and families expect medical professionals to provide protection and care. The idea that a nurse could intentionally harm patients represented a profound violation of that trust. The courtroom proceedings also revealed another difficult reality. No sentence could restore what had been lost. A prison term could hold Cullen accountable, but it could not return parents, spouses, or relatives to the families who loved them. It could not erase the pain caused by years of uncertainty. It could not answer every question about the victims who remained unidentified. Justice could provide accountability, but it could not undo the consequences. Beyond the courtroom, the Cullen case forced hospitals and healthcare organizations across the United States to examine their own systems. The central question became how someone with serious concerns surrounding his employment history had been able to continue working with vulnerable patients for so long. The answer involved multiple failures rather than one single mistake. Hospitals had not always shared information effectively. Concerns about legal liability and reputation sometimes influenced decisions. Employment references often provided limited information. Medication monitoring systems and reporting procedures needed improvement. The case demonstrated that protecting patients required stronger communication between healthcare institutions and more effective methods for identifying potential risks. Following the investigation, efforts were made to strengthen systems designed to prevent similar situations. Hospitals increased attention toward medication security, reporting procedures, and the tracking of employees with concerning histories. The case encouraged discussions about how healthcare institutions should respond when employees are suspected of misconduct, but evidence is incomplete. The challenge remained balancing fairness to employees with the responsibility to protect patients. The legacy of Charles Cullen extended beyond the crimes themselves. His actions damaged public confidence and forced medical organizations to confront uncomfortable questions about vulnerability within healthcare settings. Yet the response also highlighted the importance of accountability and improvement. The overwhelming majority of healthcare professionals dedicate their careers to helping patients. The Cullen case became shocking precisely because it represented such a profound violation of that mission. Years after his arrest and conviction, many questions remain. How many people truly died because of Cullen? Were there victims whose families never learned the truth? Could earlier communication between hospitals have stopped him sooner? Could stronger oversight systems have prevented some of the deaths? These questions continue to surround the case because the full story may never be completely known. Charles Cullen remains one of the most notorious examples of a healthcare worker who used professional access to commit murder. His crimes revealed vulnerabilities within a system built on trust, but they also led to important conversations about improving patient safety. The victims remain at the center of the story, not the person who harmed them, but the lives they lived before entering hospitals expecting care. They were individuals with families, memories, and futures that ended far too soon. The lasting lesson of the case is not simply about one dangerous individual. It is about the responsibility to protect those who place their lives in the hands of others, especially during their most vulnerable moments. The story of Charles Cullen ended with a prison sentence, but the questions raised by his crimes continue to influence how healthcare systems think about trust, accountability, and the duty to protect every patient who enters their care.